Hi guys, welcome back to our Big Book series. This is, I think, the fourth episode, and today we're going to be talking about a really cool story from the second half of the Big Book. So some preface. If you've never read the Big Book or it's something that you're just starting, the first section is a lot of conceptual stuff. So things like Bill's story, things like a doctor's opinion, things like we agnostics, things along those lines that are about the program and the concepts behind it. And then the second half of it is solely testimony. So it's people who have gone through the program, people who fought addiction, people who got over addiction, all because of the program. And so it's laying the foundation and then it's showing what it can do if done correctly. And so today I really wanted to talk about perhaps one of the more iconic parts of the second half of the Big Book, that being he lived only to drink. And I think this is almost one of the most perfect representations of what addiction is, point blank, period, right? This chapter begins with this man, and he's speaking about his experiences, and he says that regarding his alcoholism and his addiction, he had been preached to, he had been counseled, though he'd never been offered empathy. So his family had told him, hey, this is what you need to stop. Oh, if you really just loved me, you would stop. Oh, if this, if that, if this, if that, you would stop. And that's just not what he needed. And he said he had never once been offered empathy. And I think that's criminal. And I think as Al-Anon remembers, this very first sentence of the entire chapter, we can take and say, hey, look, fixing the alcoholic is not our job. That's something else's job. That's a higher power job. That's their job in coordinates with a higher power, in coordinates with something else, right? It's not our job. The only thing we need to do is offer empathy and be there. And that's hard to do because, especially if it's your son or your daughter or somebody who historically you've cared for, looking at their addiction and alcoholism hurt them so innately bad, and not doing much is hard. But empathy is the best thing to offer because they can get pity and counsel from 1,000 different sources, and it's not going to help. It's not going to fix that powerlessness, right? So then he starts talking about his origins. And he says that coming from this deeply religious family, he was the first alcoholic in his family, right? And his parents were deeply involved in the community. He goes on to say all these ways they were involved, right? About how good morals were completely injected into him for his entire life, right? Where he was grown up and raised in this kind of idealistic environment where religion ruled all and morality was God. And he describes this, and he describes that, at least to me, to say that, hey, alcoholics start in a million different positions, and the only thing that they end with is powerlessness, right? And that's the only thing that defines an alcoholic. You don't have to have grown up in slums, and you could have been rich, and you could have been like this man who grew up with a strong moral compass, right? And didn't have a history of addiction in his family. And that's all very true. And then he describes his first experience with drinking at a cocktail lounge as a grad student. So very late in his life, right? He had gone through undergraduate, he had gone through high school, he'd gone through all of these things in which people often drink in, and he had never drunk. And then he gets to this place, and he goes to a cocktail lounge in a grad school, and he gets drunk. And he says that he drinks so much that the people thought that he was a seasoned drinker, that he was like the guy, that he like went to bars all the time, and he hadn't. And I think that's kind of peculiar. And he describes this complete and utter comfort that was involved in the drinking that he said he had never really felt throughout his entire life. And he kind of, to me, describes this underpin of almost religious guilt that made him completely uncomfortable for his entire life. And then he gets to his cocktail lounge in grad school and he says, I'm comfortable for the first time, and I don't even know how long, and it's because of this magical elixir that's in my hand, right? And drinking becomes a complete and utter revelation for him. And he starts drinking all the time. Concurrently, he starts teaching, right? He graduates and he has a PhD, and he's gone through grad school, and he becomes a teacher, a professor, and is forced to resign very shortly after it because of it. And so, another example of great things happening highly educated people, highly moral people becoming powerless, and another testament to the fact that the alcoholic is not defined by one thing, nor does every alcoholic's journey look the same, right? And so, in response to his resignation, he begins to self-reflect, and he says, no, alcohol could not possibly be the problem. Alcohol is my friend, right? Alcohol is this thing that's got me out of my shell, that's made me so comfortable when I was never comfortable before. Like, he lived in this guilt and in this place for his whole life, and then he finds this friend in alcohol, and then things start to go downhill, and of course it's not his friend, it couldn't be. And so he finds himself lacking really any responsibility, and he gets another job, and he can routinely find himself drunk in class, and this continually happens, and he ends his teaching career and ends up being completely alone, with alcohol being his only friend. And it becomes this thing that he has no control over, and that he can't control whenever he does it, when he stops, when he is drunk, when he is not drunk. That's out of his hands. And yet, he believes it to be his best friend, because it's still, nevertheless, the only thing that brings him comfort, especially amidst all these terrible things happening to him, right? If you are trying to get into the head of the alcoholic, you think these bad things are happening, and the only thing that makes me feel better is alcohol. And so you drink more to feel better, but then the negative repercussions of your drinking cause you to lose more and to crave more comfort, and so you drink more, and then you lose more and you drink more, and it keeps happening. And the only thing that remains constant is you must drink, and that at least some comfort is achieved in drinking, and so you continue to drink. And so eventually, and this is a quite big jump, but he ends up in an insane asylum, right? And he proclaims that this saved his life, because he had become completely and utterly suicidal. And he didn't believe he could make it before going to the asylum, and then after, he enters normal life again and says, I don't know if I can make it. And his life becomes this kind of series of new beginnings, of restarts, of new tales, right? He becomes homeless at some point, and he still is only scrounging for alcohol. Alcohol is his only acquaintance. And I don't say friend because we know what it is, right? It's somebody who's there. Perhaps it's an enemy. Perhaps it's his devil. And it's still there. And he is constantly scrounging for alcohol and cigarettes and as much money as he possibly can get. And his life completely falls apart. And this moment, this rock bottom, is where the title of the chapter comes from. He lived only to drink. It doesn't describe him scrounging for food and water. It describes him scrounging for alcohol and cigarettes. He lives only to drink. And he is at the whim, at the will, at the beck and call of that first drink. And his life totally falls apart. He proclaims that there is nothing left to live for, that he was too frightened to die. And one day, a recovered alcoholic comes to him and tells him her story. And this was a huge chance, because it's the first time in his entire life that he's offered empathy. That someone comes to him and says, I understand where you're coming from. I understand what you're going through and how hard it is. And this, as big as drinking was for the first time, is a revelation. And so, stepping back from the story, as Al-Anon members, we must understand alcoholism as well as the alcoholic. As well as the man with 20 years of sobriety, we must understand it like the back of our own hand. To not understand addiction as a family member or a friend of an alcoholic, I don't want to say it's criminal because it's not our responsibility, but it's so hard to help them by doing anything besides just offering empathy and being there for them. You're not going to fix an alcoholic, but you can offer empathy, and that's the best thing you can do. And sometimes that means saving their life. Is understanding. Not preaching, but saying, hey, I know this disease. I've seen it. I've heard of it. I've read all about it. And at least on a conceptual level, I can be there for you. And I can empathize. And so going back to the story, our character, this man, feels that for the very, very first time and identifies with him and makes him feel as if he totally matters. As if this woman is coming and putting her effort in telling her story because she believes he must hear it, and she believes that he deserves to hear it and deserves to be okay. So this is a revelation to him, right? And so going forward, he begins to attend meetings and withdraws, attempted to tell him that he didn't belong as a black man in a white meeting, that he doesn't belong in the recovery system because he is a black man, and AA is a program founded by white people, and that he was going to a predominantly white meeting, and so withdraws, alcoholism, the devil, whatever you want to call it, start telling him that he doesn't belong, right? And that's hard, because sometimes recovery is not only blocked by reality, but it's blocked by something much harder. Withdrawals are hard in the sense that delirium tremens can set in. You can die physically, but also the psychological side of it. Alcoholism is going to tell you every single lie it possibly can to get that first drink to happen. Alcoholism is going to try to pull you into that hopeless, completely and utterly powerless spiral in any possible way that it can, and that's a fact, unfortunately. And so this makes him believe that AA can't work for him, and that he was somehow different from all of them, even though they all had the same empathetic experience as him. And this all changes when he gets his first spiritual awakening, and he realizes that alcoholism as an illness is indiscriminate. He reaches this state where he has a higher power, and he says, okay, me as a black man and you as a white man, we have the same disease. If I have a cough and you have a cough, then we are no different. We both have a cough. And the same is true with alcoholism. Alcoholism is indiscriminate. And he realizes this when he has his first spiritual awakening, and it essentially changes everything. And at last, he proclaims that he is released from the shackles of his uniqueness. Being unique is wonderful. Being yourself is wonderful. But unfortunately, alcoholism doesn't care. And thus recovery doesn't either. So it's a bit of this catch-22 of like, it's terrible that alcoholism can affect anyone regardless of anything, regardless of upbringing, regardless of the color of their skin, regardless of how tall or short you are. I'm very tall, of course. I say that being 5'7". And that sucks, but it also means that one can find empathy and be empathetic with anybody. And that's remarkable, and that's miraculous, and this is a fact of alcoholism that is amazing, and that the program is built off of, and that fellowship thrives off of. And so from this point on, our character, the subject of our story, is okay and continues to be okay, and the tides of life flow endlessly, and his sobriety becomes completely independent of this. The biggest takeaway from this story is that an alcoholic can never recover alone. That the path towards recovery is not a one-stop shop that you go into. It's something that you find hope in others through, right? We see this in Bill's story too. Bill doesn't recover until a member of AA approaches him. And we wouldn't have AA without that story, without that fellowship, without that empathy. And that's the whole point of this story, is that the path towards beating alcoholism begins with grabbing the hand of somebody who's done it before you. And the path towards helping an alcoholic or a family member is leading them towards those hands and being empathetic in every possible way you can. And I think that's extremely important. That's why this is the first story I really wanted to talk about, is that's true no matter what. And I think that's beautiful, right? Because a lot of the stories are there to show you that you can be empathetic towards anyone, right? That your story is probably not unique. If you read enough, you'll find yourself in this book. But this story is less specific in a lot of ways, and is just like, hey, you can't do it alone. And I think that's really nice, because you'll always be able to find people so that you don't have to. Okay, I think that's where I'll stop it. I really thank whoever's watching this, and I ask that you drop a comment, tell me your thoughts, reach out however you can if you'd like, and I appreciate it. So thank you so much. Bye.